EMP Series, Day 173. Tyler Hobbs briefed his group at breakfast. He told them about the incident with the constable yesterday, and how he had killed the man to save his life. He also told them about the meeting that he had attended at the church, and how things were going to proceed differently now. He cautioned his men about laying low and staying within the confines of the law. "We have tried things in the way Bailey Bezio wanted it, and it ended in his death, and the death of other good men, his oldest son included. We're going to do things differently now. Carl Fairley and the newly appointed Board of Governors wants the same thing that we do, for the military to leave, and for the people to govern ourselves. It is my intention to work with them to facilitate these things. If and when it comes time to revert to violence to further our agenda, we will have the Board of Governors, the Constable, and all that follow them on our side with us." There was murmuring in the group, followed by much discussion. In the end, they decided to follow Tyler Hobbs and his recommendation to go along with the plan. Carl Fairley arrived in his office early. He sat at his desk, drinking his coffee, staring at the wall. He was still trying to process the events of yesterday and what it all meant. There were obviously several key pieces to the puzzle still missing. Who gave the order to kill Lee, and why? Who was Nunez working with? Was it the same person that is pulling Major Stillman's strings? Nunez working for the same person as Stillman. The thought of that was unsettling. If that was true, how much info about Carl had Nunez shared with Stillman and his bosses? What about Lieutenant Saunders? Nunez had recently just finished vetting and recruiting him prior to his death. Carl had good instincts, and he had a feeling about Saunders. He was almost certain that he could not be in alliance with Major Stillman. The two hated each other. Nunez and Carl were the only two that knew about Saunders' recruitment into Section 7, as far as Carl knew. Carl himself wasn't even supposed to know the identity of the new recruit, but he had put the pieces together and was pretty sure that it was Lieutenant Saunders. Of all the people in play, if Carl found himself in a position where he was forced to trust one of them, Lieutenant Saunders would be that choice. But for now, he wasn't going to assume anything or trust anyone. After Nunez's death yesterday, Carl alerted the Section 7 detail and upgraded the security protocols for himself and his family. Without giving any specifics, Carl briefed Zeb on the need to raise security as well. After their conversation, it was agreed by both men that Zeb would give up the messenger service job that he held, and that he would stick closer to the homestead. The Section 7 security operative that Carl had met weeks ago in the remote cabin in the mountains was at this very moment setting up camp on a ridge that overlooked the dirt road leading on to the Fairley homestead. From that vantage point, he could see the road as well as the main house and barn. He was also in range of a radio repeater that he had set up between his position and the cabin in the mountains that he shared with two other security personnel. He was set up to monitor the radio frequency that Carl used to communicate with his family when he was away from home. Lieutenant Saunders heard the news about Tyler Hobbs killing a man to save Carl Fairley's life. He was at the morgue that morning to collect the remains of the 2 soldiers that were murdered at the train a couple weeks back. The bodies were released to be cremated a few days ago. Saunders was going to collect the remains and the personal effects of the soldiers and have them delivered to the next of kin. In the morgue, he saw the body of Edwin Nunez lying on the table. The man who had completed his recruitment into Section 7 just days ago. He was listed as John Doe, and Saunders had never actually known his name. He knew he could not go to the constable or to Major Stillman with what he knew. How would he explain it? And what did he really know anyway? He didn't have any other contact with Section 7 besides Nunez. His only option was to wait for someone from the agency to contact him. The truth was, however, he might be waiting for a long time. Nunez was recruiting Saunders for his own purposes, and while he used Section 7 security resources to vet and recruit him, he himself was the only one who actually knew that Saunders was being recruited. Once Section 7 vetted him, Nunez terminated the recruitment on an official level. He cited vague reasons, and nobody at Section 7 questioned it. That sort of thing happened pretty routinely. Even in the final stages of the recruitment process, candidates were dropped for various reasons, or for no reason at all. The head recruiter in this case, Captain Edwin Nunez, had the final say. It was completely at his discretion. Nunez did, however, share the fact that he was recruiting a subordinate of Major Stillman to his friend, Carl Fairley. And while Nunez did not share the recruit's identity, Carl had put 2 and 2 together and was pretty certain that the new recruit was Lieutenant Saunders. But now, Carl felt somewhat compromised also, and was playing his cards close to the vest as well. He would keep Saunders at arm's length and see how things played out. At the same time, he felt an obligation to him. He wasn't sure how Nunez had involved him or how much Saunders knew about the Stillman investigation. And now that it was clear that the corruption went further up the chain from Major Stillman, he realized Saunders could have exposure as well and be in danger himself, possibly without even realizing it. Because of this, he issued an alert on Lieutenant Saunders to the security detail of Section 7. He told them that he was simply a person of interest in an ongoing investigation and he wanted him under surveillance 24/7. He informed them that they were not to make contact unless it seemed as if his life was in danger. Then they were able to intercede to provide protection as well. He also ordered daily reports on his activities. Carl felt that if he was correct about Lieutenant Saunders being Nunez's newest recruit, he was not going to let him be the latest casualty for a cause that Carl questioned the legitimacy of. He knew Saunders to be a patriot and loyal to the Constitution of these United States. He knew his priorities were sound and that he was adamant that he was going to make sure he was protected. Also, he knew the day most likely would come, and probably soon, when he would need Saunders' help with his plan to return the region to the citizens to which it belonged. He wanted him to be an ally rather than an enemy. Carl sat there and drank his coffee. He contemplated the events of the last couple days and replayed every possible scenario of how to proceed over in his head. Carl was methodical and precise in his thinking and plotting. He would typically spend hours planning contingencies for every scenario, and then planning contingencies for those contingencies. His focus was razor sharp, and he had to have every detail in place just right before he could proceed in his plan. Time stood still, and the hours just melted away. One thing was different in his process this time, though. His friend and partner, Edwin Nunez, was not there with him. He was used to going over the details out loud with him, and then he would present the alternative scenario. Then Carl would plan around that, and so on. The process would continue. Carl missed his friend. He missed his partner. He struggled to accept the fact that he was gone. After several hours, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. He had given Frank a list of things to do before sending him on rounds. He told him he did not want to be disturbed. The train slowed to a stop just short of the blown-out trestle. Several replacement troops stepped off, as did a couple rail workers, who immediately went to work offloading cargo onto a truck that the military had waiting there for them. In the last car, 3 men got up and walked to the front. They were wearing civilian clothes and had badges on their jackets that identified them as employees of the railroad. The badges were identical to the ones that the men unloading the cargo wore. But these men didn't go to help unload the cargo. Instead, they walked over to the edge, appearing to survey the damaged trestle and the progress that had been made on its repair. When the truck was almost fully loaded, they walked over and climbed back in. One of the men flashed some papers at the cargo handler in charge and said, "We're here to engineer the trestle rebuild. We need to be dropped off in town, hopefully somewhere where we can get a room." "Yes, sir. It's about a 10-minute ride," he said. The other man just nodded as he and his partner got in the truck. The leader had a long snake tattoo wrapping up and around his arm, which was almost covered by the sleeve of his jacket. Just the top of the snake's head was visible, poking out from under his jacket collar. Also covered on his left breast was the tattoo that identified him as a member of the Tunnel Rats MC. The same tattoo that Roger, Lee, and Buddy Tanner wore. He was, in fact, Billy the Kid Bennett. He was a lieutenant in the MC, unknown to any of the club members that came initially with Buddy Tanner. Billy the Kid was receiving check-ins every 3 days from Buddy Tanner, with the strict instructions to come if the check-ins stopped for any reason. Buddy Tanner wasn't the sort of man to trust anyone. He set up the protocol with Bennett in case something happened to him. The men that accompanied Tanner out knew that if anything happened to him, that they were immediately to contact the MC. If Buddy failed to check in with Bennett, and none of the guys notified the MC, then, when Billy the Kid showed up, the men that came with Buddy should all be missing or dead as well. If they weren't, then Billy the Kid would have serious questions for them. Questions to which they would be unable to answer. Bennett was aware of Tanner's initial mission of hunting down Roger. If Buddy Tanner and his men were dead or missing, then he must go off the assumption that Roger had somehow defeated the three of them. Bennett was not looking forward to what he might find. He liked Roger. They were friends as well as brothers in the MC. The last thing Bennett wanted to do was confront Roger. But since he joined the club years earlier, all that he had ever known was loyalty to the club. Nothing and nobody in his life took priority over his commitment to the club. Buddy Tanner knew this when he tasked him for this assignment. The truck stopped in front of the entrance to the railroad workers' camp. The driver informed the men that they would all be given accommodations here. The two cargo handlers got off, grabbed their gear, and headed for the gate. Billy Bennett looked at the driver and said, "We need rooms. Is there a hotel around here? We aren't staying in that camp." He sounded disgusted at the thought of staying there with the common workers. The driver thought to himself, "It figures. Engineer types." He had seen the likes of them before. Too good to mingle with the peasants. He glared at Bennett and motioned across the street. "There's a boarding house right over there." Bennett and the other two club members grabbed their gear and got off the truck, walking over toward the hotel. Major Stillman was sitting across the desk from Congressman Holmes. Holmes made his point to Stillman. "Let them have the region back, Stillman. The people calling the shots want the chaos. Their agenda still calls for more population reduction. Let these people kill each other. The only reason we entered this region in the first place was to quell the unrest so we could take control of the rail line. Martial law has only been imposed in specific areas. The decision makers are still letting some areas continue to deteriorate. Looking at the rest of this state, we're only here helping in the cities and towns along the valley. What's in the valley? The rail line and the river. We are rebuilding the line, and we're reconstructing the hydroelectric plants. The rest of the state continues to be in a state of chaos. I'm sick of dealing with these issues that come up with these people. Sometimes I wish we could just go away and let them all kill each other." Major Stillman spoke up. "Well, it might be easier, but if we let the area deteriorate back into chaos, it would be difficult to control the rail system. And the hydropower construction would be almost impossible as well." I know, said Holmes. "We're stuck with them, and they are stuck with us. I'll tell you this, though, Congressman. If we don't act quickly and decisively, we're going to have a big problem on our hands. The natives are getting restless, and the local group that I was using to help further our agenda is turning on us as well. Hobbs and his men were on board with our plans, but lately I'm not so sure. He has even gotten himself appointed to the local board of governors. They're going to be a big problem, sir." "Nonsense," shouted Holmes. "That board was put in place just to appease the citizens. They have no authority or power. We could crush them with a single blow, Stillman." "Well, sir, maybe, but they're gaining a following, and they're getting more organized every day. I told you they held a vote in favor of our withdrawal. I haven't passed it up the chain yet. I don't want it coming across the wrong desk, sir. Yeah, we still have some do-gooders, constitutional purists on the staff in Washington, too. I have rallied some support for our side, but there are still a number of holdouts. The importance of holding this region may not be as important to them as it is to us. Continue to sit on the vote for now, Major. I'll work on it from my end when I get back to D.C. Yes, sir, replied Major Stillman. Can you handle the citizens as things stand now? Asked Holmes. Again, the reply came, Yes, sir, from the Major. Congressman Holmes had another problem. One he wasn't willing to share with Major Stillman. The CIA and the FBI were pawns in the global elite's quest for world domination. They marched to their orders, and they didn't ask questions. They were good soldiers. They did as they always had, following orders and not asking for explanations. This made them an effective force in the globalist agenda. However, there were certain rogue groups that had operated as splinter factions of the larger agencies for years. They were somewhat autonomous. They'd operated independently for a reason. They provided a means for a checks and balance system for the larger body from which they were formed. They were run independently and covertly. They were run by true patriots, men like Carl Fairley, and, to a lesser degree, Edwin Nunez. Some of these men could be made to toe the larger company line, much as Nunez had been. Others followed a different code of conduct. They were true patriots, in the very most literal sense, incorruptible men. Men who had held their loyalty and the oath that they took to uphold the United States Constitution in the highest regard. Ted Holmes had many of these patriots removed, or even killed. But he was finding that more and more of these groups and individuals that were unknown or underestimated. These men were beginning to rise up everywhere to fight the oppression that the likes of Holmes and his forces brought to bear on the people. In the case of Carl Fairley, Holmes did not even know that he was connected to the company. In many ways, he wasn't connected. In the most practical and meaningful sense, he wasn't connected at all. Nunez had freed Carl years earlier from his bondage with the company. Carl then, and only then, served of his own free will with his friend because he believed in their cause. He was paid with money that had been procured illegally by Nunez without Carl's knowledge. There was no official record anywhere of Carl's involvement with Section 7. In fact, Nunez was the only one who knew his true identity. The others who served with him only knew him by his code name. Carl could walk away now with nobody ever knowing why or where he went. But he wasn't going to do that. Not anytime soon, anyway. He needed them to help secure his family and provide investigative support. He would use them for as long as he could in the furtherance of his agenda. He would use them to help free the people of this region from an oppressive government. More and more of these independent, autonomous groups were popping up throughout the country, trying to reclaim this nation for its citizens. This was beginning to be a very real problem for Ted Holmes and others like him. They had not anticipated good men who believed in and honored their oaths to the offices that they held to rise up in large numbers. He must secure control of this nation for the elitists he served. Those men and women that pulled his strings had demanded results at any cost. He knew that control of the infrastructure, such as the rail lines and the power plants, was key to the success of their agendas. For this service, he was promised his place within the New World Order. He dismissed Major Stillman and walked over to his window. He lit an expensive cigar and poured a glass of aged Scotch whiskey. He stood there looking out over the valley. Yes, he thought, he would claim control, whatever the cost.